Do YouTube sponsorships create bias in content creators' content? Let's discuss. There's quite a number of channels in the sports card world that are sponsored by this or that different sports card company. Sports Card Dad is a good example. He has a lot of different sponsors. He's sponsored by Whatnot. He's sponsored by COMC. He's sponsored by SGC, I believe, a bunch of other places, some auction houses, some different places. He's sponsored by all of these. So we'll have a video and he'll make a little advertisement in the middle of his video here and there, a little 10-second, 15-second blurb about COMC or about whatever his sponsor is for that video. And he'll go on to continue with the content of his video. Now the question is, does that kind of thing create bias in a content creator? And I think the answer is a little bit more complicated than we oftentimes give it credit for. On the one hand, I think personally, if somebody takes a sponsorship from a company that they use or that they respect or that they trust, I see no problem with it. In fact, with the way that YouTube works, we're going to get advertisements one way or another. I'd rather the advertising money that's connected to a video go to that content creator. That content creator is putting in a lot of work, putting in a lot of energy, putting in a lot of time, a lot of thought to create something that you are getting value from, or else you wouldn't be watching it. And for them to be monetized, for them to monetize that through getting a sponsorship from a company that they trust, I see nothing wrong with that inherently. You're going to get that advertisement. I'd rather get that 15-second blurb about COMC than some ad about some random whatever that I am going to have to press the skip ad button on anyway, and that has nothing to do with anything I'm interested in. I'd rather have Dustin telling me about COMC for 15 seconds. I prefer it that way. But then the question then goes to whether that creates bias. And that's where I feel it's a little bit hard to say. Sometimes, yes, it can, and you can see it at times. Like Mike from the Sports Card Nonsense podcast. I like those guys. I like their podcast. I like what they talk about. They have large sponsorships from Panini and from other places, and you can see that in the way that they present things at times. They have no choice because they're sponsored by to such a large degree. Somebody like Dustin, the Sports Card Dad, maybe his sponsorships are smaller scale. I don't get the sense that what he's saying is shifted too much one way or the other by his sponsorships. I mean, maybe there's certain things he won't bring up in a video as often. He won't create a video looking at certain things that are going to directly hurt his sponsor. He might not seek it out specifically, but at the same time, he's probably going to be, I don't think it needs to shift his perception on things too much. So I think part of it is how big of a sponsorship is it? How invested in the industry connected to that company is your business. If your content is really a business, how invested are you in that specific sponsorship? And sometimes you can see that the roots are deeper, and sometimes the roots are more shallow in that kind of sponsorship. I do think there is some unconscious bias that can come up when you have a sponsorship, but it's not only a sponsorship. It can also be when you become personally just a connection with a particular business. I think you've probably seen in my own videos, I'm not sponsored by anybody, but the way that I talk about COMC, for example, when I'm discussing COMC, is always very positive, and I'm always putting a positive spin on the way they do things. I'm always, if people come in to say things about like their fee structures, how it's too expensive or something, I'm always kind of trying to share my perspective on how I think it's actually quite fair. But it's because I respect that company, I like that company, I'm using that company regularly, so it's just part of my discussion. The same it would be with like if I was chatting with a friend or something, to say positive things about that company. I like them. I like what they do. So, if that's the approach, if it's like that kind of authentic thing, then if you're also sponsored by them and making a little bit of money from it, it's not changing the way that you would be discussing about them anyway. Or, I think Dustin, for example, he was sponsored by SGC, but before he was sponsored by SGC, he was still talking about them positively and using them and had a lot of respect for them. So then when he gets sponsored by SGC, it doesn't change the nature of the way he's discussing it. Is there room for that to happen though? Absolutely. If there was, a conversation that came up where people were discussing PSA versus SGC versus BGS versus CSG, like he does have, even if it's unconscious, he would have some reason to speak higher about SGC now than he might be a little bit more willing to change his stance around SGC about like some negative perspective about them if he wasn't sponsored by them, and might end up leaning a little bit more towards some other company or something like that. Maybe it's possible. It's a little bit less likely it would happen when he has the sponsorship. So I do think there is room for sponsorships to create a certain unconscious bias. But at the same time, as long as the listener is aware, like this person, yes, he does have a sponsorship from these people. Could it just slightly switch, even if the content creator doesn't want to have that create bias? Could it still create a little bit of bias? Absolutely, 100% it could. I think the listener should be aware of that, and that's why, you know, a content creator needs to make their sponsorships clear, straight and outright. As long as the listener knows that there is a sponsorship, they know that there's some room for some potential bias, and so they can take what they are listening to and take what they hear with a little bit of a grain of salt. As a listener, you know, we should always be thoughtful in what other people are saying and to compare it with what we know. I do think there's room for sponsorships to make unconscious bias in people. Absolutely, it's possible. Even if the content creator is actively trying to not be influenced by that, I think there's a subtle part that they still very likely will be. But that's okay still. You know, it's just something the content creator with integrity will learn how to do that. If somebody decides to take on a sponsorship, you know, if I decided to take on a sponsorship, I would feel the need to really be critically reflective of my own content regularly to make sure that what I'm saying is coming from me. And if I find that I'm shifting and I'm moving towards saying things that are more just beneficial for that company without it being my honest reaction and my honest thinking about things, then I would need to be shifting myself. And that's something that I think each content creator is kind of charged to do independently on their own. You know, and some people you can get a sense of if they're doing that and if they're being authentic about it. And some you can start to see, this is feeling a little weird here. This is feeling a little bit more advertisement-like. And then you can kind of maybe you drift away from that content creator over time. So, you know, it's as the viewer, you actually are the one who has the power. If you see that somebody is having more and more bias, you just simply don't have to listen to that person anymore. And then eventually, if people choose to listen to what they think is the honest perspective and what they think is kind of authentic, you know, then those are the voices that are going to be heard. If those are who you're listening to and those are what this person and Joe and Sam and everybody else is listening to, then eventually that voice gets heard more. And the ones that are being influenced by the money, by the sponsorships, they get listened to less and they probably lose their sponsorship or something anyway. So I think the power actually lies in the viewers in this space. So that's you, that's me, that's all of us who are viewing these things, to actually choose to watch things that are authentic and to seek out things that are authentic. Don't just automatically go to what's on your timeline. Actually go and try to seek out voices that are authentic. You won't always find them right smack dab in the middle. That's true with everything. That's true with media. That's, you know, outside of sports cards as well. You know, like whatever you're getting smack dab in the middle of your face, probably most likely there's all kinds of hidden agendas there. Very likely. Whatever side of the political spectrum you might believe or you might agree with or whatever's just blam right there. In order to get blam right there, they've had to pay off a lot of money and all this kind of stuff to be blam right there. So you always got to be seeking out voices that are you know, on the sides of things, and try to figure out what are the authentic perspectives. What is the different ways of looking at this situation from different angles that are real. That's really up to the listener more than anybody else. But from the content creator side, I see no problem trying to figure out ways to monetize what you're doing with your time here. That's part of the goal for a lot of content creators on YouTube. It takes a lot of time. I know this from having this YouTube channel for almost 2 years now. It takes a lot of time. I mean, even now my videos are becoming much more just me on the screen talking. And they used to be a lot more like, you know, get some B-roll and get some other stuff. And I was like, oh, this is taking so long. Everything is taking so long. I'm just going to sit down and start chatting to people more often in some of my videos, because it takes a bit less time. But even this takes a long time. I have to really like sit down, come up with content ideas. I have to sit down and come up with what are my what are my thoughts about this? How am I going to express this? You know, sometimes I might take notes. Sometimes I might write a script. Sometimes like this one, I just go off the cuff. But whatever method or approach I'm doing, it takes a lot of energy. It takes a lot of time. Then when I finish this, I have to go and I have to do the video editing stuff and clip everything in and cut out the little gaps and, just make everything work smoothly. It takes a long time for each of these things. And, if this is actually providing value, I think it's okay to hope for getting a bit more of a monetized stream of income from the effort you're making. And the YouTube AdSense, unless you get up to having 100,000 subscribers, the YouTube AdSense isn't enough in itself. I mean, I've been doing this for 2 years now, and I make about $30 a month, $35 a month from this. I would much rather get some kind of sponsorship that I could also, from ComC or something. Hey, ComC, sponsor me. But I would much rather have a sponsorship like that. Maybe make a little bit more money per month, and genuinely just continue to talk about the same things I'm talking about, to share the same perspectives I'm sharing with little blurbs from ComC in there. I would be okay with that. I don't think it would influence the way I'm talking about these topics. I would be reflective of it. I would be like, okay, is this video I'm sharing about this ComC strategy, am I making this out of is everything I'm saying authentic? Am I being real here? Am I being honest, or am I hiding things so that people are more interested in going there because, these are the sponsors or whatever? Like, am I being real? If I am, if I feel that way, if I know I am in personal reflection, then I'm going to keep going. People might say, "Oh, you're selling out, you're selling out." If I know I'm not, then I'm not, and I'm going to be reflective on that myself. And that's the hope, is that other content creators would be that way too. And I don't think it's actually that hard to seek to figure out who's being authentic and who's being inauthentic and things. I mean, maybe sometimes there's people psychopath people who can really hide it, but I think it's really hard. I can't hide that. I couldn't, even if I was sponsored by some company that I genuinely didn't like, and I had to say something that I genuinely didn't believe, it would be so obvious. I can't do it. I can't hide that. It would just be blammo right in your face. So, and I think that's true with a lot of other people. Maybe there's people who are really good liars out there, but I think generally it's not hard to sniff out who's being authentic and who is saying something untruthful, generally. Anyway, that's it for this video. Hope you enjoyed it. See you in the next one. Peace.